Certainly good to see everybody here this morning. Good to see my grandson with us this morning. He made it in. I think 9-4 last come in, and hopefully he'll get feeling better. He's been a little sick, so hopefully he'll get feeling better. I was asked to do this lesson here several weeks ago, or a few weeks ago anyway. It's a very difficult lesson, and I was asked to do it with slides and things, and so I tried to get together the slides that would fit the lesson very good. And the lesson is going to be on Matthew 24. Now, Matthew 24 throughout, for many years, has caused a lot of people many troubles, and just in all honesty, it's caused many people to be found out to really not to know what they're actually talking about. And that's what we want to talk about this morning. Is first I want to give you some statistics on the fact of this chapter and what people claim through this chapter. How many of us in this building knows this man here? Well, this man is Herbert W. Armstrong. He established the Worldwide Church of God, told members of his church that the rapture was going to to take place in 1936. That only they would be saved. Now look at this. After the prophecy failed, he changed the date 3 more times. Now you think about that. You know, we talked about Peter Popoff and them here last week or so, and Junior said it. He seen him the other day on TV, and I was asking Junior, I said, ain't it strange how a man can be caught red-handed with his hand in the cookie jar, but it just does not seem to bother people about him? Well, here's a feller who changed his prophecy that he had made. Do you know what would have happened to this man under the old law? This man would have been stoned to death. Because under that, the prophet that prophesied, if it did not come to pass as he said, he was to be found a liar and then stoned to death. That would have been what happened to this fellow. He predicted it in 1936. Well, that's more years than I am old, probably as many years as most people sitting in here. And we're still here. Think that's strange? You know this fella? Well, this is Russell, the fella that established the Jehovah's Witness. A prediction of the end from Jehovah's Witness, a group which branched from the study movement. Well, they said that it would come to pass or end in 1941. Well, you know, that's still older than what I am. Now, it may not be older than everybody here. You may can remember the fact that this man, who established by 1872, I believe, Charles T. Russell, and he established it, and he predicted that the end of time would come then. Well, guess what? We're still here, ain't we? We're still here. Do you know these two fellas? Look at the fella up there in the top corner, Jerry Falwell. This sort of struck me strange that Jerry Falwell, being the man that established Liberty Baptist, would make such a prediction. But he did. Jerry Falwell foresaw God pouring out of his judgment on the world on this date, 2000, January the 1st, 2000. Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins also. Now, if you remember in 2000, they were a big uproar over that. I mean, because we were turning, people had airplanes falling out of the sky. They had every computer in the world. The old said, don't you know our computers was just fixed to 2000? I don't know what they were talking about, but it's something about that all the computers was going to fail. I reckon they were people who sold their stuff, getting ready for the Lord. And I'm thinking, why would you sell anything if you were getting ready for the Lord? Why would you do that? I mean, the Bible tells me all this is going to be burned up. The only thing that's going to go off in this earth is the souls that are saved, and those that are not saved is going to go into a devil's hell. Well, look at the next guy down here. He's a very popular fella, and people say he's very smart. But here's what he said. 2014, April the 20th, 2014, September 2015, John Hagee and Mark Bezick, if I say that word right, the so-called blood moon prophecy. Now, you remember that. Even my grandson got up in that and got a little bit worried. And I told him, I said, don't get worried about that. I don't know how I popped that. I said, don't get worried about that. I said, they've been doing this for many years. Now, I need to do something here before I go any further, okay? I got to make a little change here. Just a little bit. It may not even bother you there. But I want you to think about this. And think about these people that are doing this. And just think about it. All these prophecies. Well, this fella here, now I'm half Mede, so it sort of bothered me. I thought we were smarter than this. 2017, September, David Meade claimed that this nearby, or how you say it, this planet X was going to collide with the Earth. And Armageddon would take place during this day. That's it. Well, let's see. Are we not in, now we're not October now, ain't we? Let's see, what was last month? Was it September? Well, I guess we're still here. Whew. Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about, as we're looking at this, these are supposed to be very intelligent people. But they've all been found to know and to understand that they don't know what they're talking about. They really don't know what they're talking about. And they go to Matthew chapter 24 and some of the old prophecies from the Bible, and they twist them and shape them into what they want people to believe. And they've missed it. Now here's the thing about this that you may not know. I didn't know it until I started trying to do this lesson. From AD 66 to 2017, there has been 165 prophets or prophecies about the end of the world. Can you believe that? 165 times that man says, hey, this is it. This is it. It's gone. It's going to be destroyed. And you know what's funny? You get on the internet and look this up. They didn't only do this up to this time. You got people that have got it set for the future events. I had a neighbor that passed away. He said the Lord is going to be here in 2012. This was when this calendar was going to be outdated. It was going to reach its date. The Mayan calendar or something like that they called it. And he said, I'm going to be here when the Lord comes. Well, sadly, my neighbor passed away. And yet the Lord has not come yet. What's the problem? Well, I'm going to say it like Roger says it. These people are whittling on the stick of God that they have no idea. They have no idea. They take these verses and try to put them together to make it say what it's not saying. So that's what brings us to Matthew chapter 24. Now, I'm going to try with the best of my ability to show what Matthew 24 is really talking about. And if you got questions about this lesson, it's going to be a two-part lesson, there's no doubt. But if you got questions about this lesson, you can ask me. It don't mean I can answer everything, but you can certainly ask me. I want you to think about this chapter. It has often been misunderstood and been used by false teachers to set forth various ideals and theories about the second coming of Christ. A reign of Christ on earth is supposed to be taught in this very package. This is the rapture. that where people come to hit, and especially over in Revelation chapter 21, they go there where it talks about the 1,000-year reign and stuff like that. But we're going to deal with just Matthew and every now and then hit in Luke 21 and Mark 13, because this is where it's taught again and redid. But think about this. When you look at these chapters, these 3 chapters, you got to understand what Jesus is doing. When you back up to chapter 23 of Matthew, Jesus, sure, he hammers the Pharisees and scribes. He talks about them being hypocrites. He talks about them being, because they would enlarge the borders of their garments and stuff, and they make long prayers. And buddy, I mean, Jesus just really hammers them to tell them just what kind of people they are. In chapter 23 and verse 13 here, he starts pronouncing woes upon the scribes and the Pharisees and the hypocrites, because they would not enter the kingdom of God, and yet they would hinder those who would. So Jesus really hammers them. Now, Jesus not only hammers these people as this, but in this, Jesus announces 8 times, I'm holding up 4 fingers, so double that, 8 times the woes upon these Pharisees. Now, a Pharisee is a religious person, a scribe is just a writer. But these people, he was a writer of the laws. He should know. Pharisees was the religious leaders. They should have known. So Jesus really hammers them and tells them just exactly what they are. Now we come to chapter 24. Now Jesus is leaving the temple. He's left it with his disciples. And as they are walking away from this temple, and by the way, Jesus never enters this temple anymore. He never goes back there. This is supposed to have been on a Tuesday, and Jesus, when he leaves it, he never enters it no more. But as they're walking away, and we read, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? For verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, and this is called the Olive Discord, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us when these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world. I'm going to ask you and just answer within yourself. How many questions do you see there? Right. There's 3 questions asked in this chapter. When Jesus tells them about the destruction of Jerusalem, immediately the disciples connects that with the destruction of the world, the end of time. And rightfully so. Rightfully so, when Jesus said it's going to come a time when there won't be a stone left upon another here. Naturally, your mind goes to the end of the time. And that's what's wrong with people today. That's what's wrong with people today. They misunderstand what Jesus is saying. Now, some people say that this has to do all with just Jerusalem, and it does. And that's why we're going to try to break it down in segments to show what each segment that Jesus really was talking about. And I hope I can make this plain enough for every individual to understand it. So, there is 3 questions asked there. Tell us, when shall these things be? What things? The destruction of the temple. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of this world? That's 3 questions without a doubt. So as we look at this, look at Mark chapter 13 and verse 1 here. And when they went out of the temple, one of the disciples said unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. In other words, the disciples wanted Jesus to look at the magnificence of it, the beauty of this temple. Just look how beautiful this is. It was beautifully constructed, but in it was so corrupt anymore. Those people that were there should have been those people who had welcomed Jesus and really had taken hold of him and believed. That's what John says when John said he came to his own, but his own received him not. You see, they were rejecting Jesus all along. And as they rejected the Messiah, they become even more evil and more corrupt, because eventually they put him to death. So you think about this beautiful building, and just to give you an idea, look at this. This is models now. We don't have truly pictures, but these are scale models. When Jesus is talking about all of it being destroyed, we need to understand right here is what Jesus is talking about, this area right here. Now, because we still have some of the wall that stands, this outside wall back here. On the outside, and we'll show it in a minute. Let's get on over and this gives a better picture. Now, this outside wall, wait a minute, let me back up here. Back up. I'm going the wrong way. I'm still going the wrong way. This outside wall, see it right in here, these walls? Now, part of them walls still stand today. It's called the Western Wall, the Wall of Wailing. You've heard of that? This is where Jews go today. And what do they do here at this wall? Well, we'll show that in a minute. But you see, the part that Jesus is talking about being destroyed was that inner part. Now, see that big gold dome right there? That's what's there now. Here's this wall. As you see this wall, that was the wall. Now, this wall did not connect to the temple itself. This was a wall that Herod had instructed or constructed and for the enlargement of it. But, that didn't hardly take place. So you see what's there today. There's nothing there to be seen. When you think about that, here's that wall. You see these people standing there? These are Jews. You know what they're doing? They're standing there praying. Some of them are even kissing the wall. And what they do, if you look real close, you can see little papers like right there, and see them little papers right in there, and papers all down through it. And what they do, they go there with the written prayer and they slip it into the cracks of that. Now, what these people are looking for is for the glorious days of David again. Why are they looking for it? Because they're still looking for the Messiah. They rejected Jesus because Jesus was not their Messiah. They still looking for their Messiah. Ain't that strange? That these people will look for their Messiah while their Messiah is already gone. He's already went back to heaven. They did not recognize him. But yet they hold this wall as their most holy site. That's their most holy site. And the reason why was because it was connected to the old Jerusalem temple that was destroyed. That's what they got left. Jesus said to them, there won't be a stone left in that temple one upon another. It's going to be totally wiped out. And doing so, the whole religious system of the Jew was wiped out in that. And so that's what Jesus is talking about when he is talking about, tell us when these things be. 3 questions. When shall these things be? The overthrow of the temple. What shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And they supposed that these would be connected to the end of the world. So now Jesus begins to talk to them. And he begins to explain their questions. Now look what Jesus says here. Now remember, he's already done told them that the temple is going to be destroyed. And this is going to bring the religious things of the Jews to a complete end. Jerusalem, the Jews, will never be the place that it was. Well, we have people today, and here is some of the things that they say. They say, oh yeah, but now Israel become a state, I think it was in 1945. I could be wrong, it might have been 41, but I know it's in that area somewhere. And they said, see, that's fulfilling the prophecy of God. No, it's not fulfilling the prophecy of God. They're taking a prophecy of Jerusalem coming back under the Syrians or the Babylonians and reestablishing. And they're making it this day and time. The Jewish economy, as far as religion and their system, is forever gone. Jesus nailed it to his cross. Jesus was the fulfillment of that law, and this is his final prediction or prophecy of this Jewish temple, that it would be destroyed. So Jesus is answering that. Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. Now, notice what Jesus says there. He said, all these things must come to pass. All of them must come to pass. But the end is not yet. I remember when old man Bush, George Bush, went over into the Middle East to free Kuwait. I don't know how many phone calls that I got about this going to be the end of time, about this little nation raising and conquering and ruling the world. And I said, that's not in the Bible. One fella argued me to the point, he said, I'll call a preacher in Laurel County. This was before I got down here. And he called that preacher. I don't know who it was. And the next day I said, did you call that preacher? He said, yeah, and I'll never talk to him no more. The preacher didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. But look at it. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places, and all these things are the beginning of sorrow. Now, who is the beginning of sorrow for? He just said, look, I'm going to destroy the temple. I have placed judgment upon it, and it's going to be destroyed. Now, think about judgment of God. When the children of Israel got out of hand, they would forsake God. God would use a heathen nation such as Syria, such as Babylon, such as Egypt, and he would bring them down. And they would go into captivity. God would destroy their benefits, their wealth, and everything, and even to their religion, to the point that they couldn't do it by these other heathen nations. Well, that's what's fixing to happen to Jerusalem. That's what's fixing to happen here. Now, but he says to them, look, these things sure is going to come to pass. We got to have some things done here. We're not going to just wipe it out real fast, but things are going to happen that's going to bring these things about. Now, when you think about that, you can look at Mark and Luke, and they record the same thing. Well, we got historians that tell us about the history of that time. He says in AD 30 to 70, here that they had wars and ravishings and pestilence and famines and wars that we read. One famine, and we talked about that one famine right here this morning. When Agabus the prophet comes down here with Paul and them, he tells them about this big famine that was going to hit throughout the world. Well, this historian here tells us that in that about 30,000 died. Here's what they died from: pestilence, starvation, sickness, because when you have this, it brings on all these other things. People get, I'd say, starving and malnutritious. They get weak. They are susceptible to sin or to sickness and things like this. And so he tells us about this. Now look, the Bible here says that this happened. Now look, down there at the bottom, I sort of dated these so we could keep up with them. Now, again, these are estimated dates, but as Roger said this morning, by the famines, we can pretty much get close to these. This should have taken place somewhere through from 37 to 42, that famine. Now, we got historians talking about that famine, telling us what happened in that famine. Well, what did Jesus just say to his disciples? There shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes. Well, we can read in the Bible. We hear about some earthquakes. I don't know exactly what caused them, but think about in Acts chapter 16. Paul and Barnabas and them in jail. And there come a quaking and the doors flew open. Did God use a natural thing to throw his doors open? Did God cause the earthquake in himself? If he did, either way, it's an earthquake. So we see these things are happening just like Jesus said. Jesus said to his disciples, these things has to happen first. And so we read of these things happening in the Bible, leading up to what Jesus said that he would do to Jerusalem. Think about this. Now let's look at Matthew chapter 9 through 13. Or rather 24 and verses 9 through 13. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake, and then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another, and many false prophets shall arise, shall deceive many. And because of the iniquity abounds, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that endureth to the end shall be saved. Now remember, when a prophet was given prophecies, there was sometimes twofold meanings to them. Now we could look at this verse and say that Jesus was talking about the end of time. And that's true. That's a true statement. You remember when God said to Adam and Eve, in the very day that you eat this fruit, you shall surely die? That didn't come to pass to their literal death, but they were separated from God. You see, it had twofold meaning. The day that you do it, you're going to be separated from God. But that's going to bring on a physical death later. Well, here with the falling of Jerusalem, there was Christians at that time. And all this trouble that they were having, afflicted, killed, hated, a lot of them would give up their faith. So Jesus is just saying, look, before Jerusalem falls, this is what's going to happen to you as a child of God. So if you give it up, you're going to be lost. If you die in that, you give it up, you're lost. If you stay faithful to God, you die in this situation, you're still saved. But think about it. Were Christians actually in those days stoned and killed? Well, again, let's look at this about AD 42, 31. Let's start with verse 30, or with AD 31. Now, we've just studied this with Roger. What happened in Acts chapter 7? We should know that this is the death of Stephen. Stephen is stoned to death. What did he say? They shall kill you. They shall kill you. Acts chapter 12, James, the brother of John, is killed with the sword, AD 42. Herod did this. And he seen that it pleased the other, and he was going to go farther. But he didn't get the opportunity. So you see, again, here what Jesus is telling them is coming to pass in their lifetime. Everything that Jesus has said to them so far is coming to pass in those people's lifetimes. And we'll find out why that they are doing and seeing. We will understand why that these men are seeing this. We'll see why they're seeing this. This is Jesus explaining their questions. What's going to take place before this? Well, Jesus said, right here's what's going to happen to you before this ends. This is what's going to happen to you. So you need to be on your guard. You need to be aware of this. You need to be ready for it. Because they're going to hate you. They're going to kill you. They're going to mistreat you. And then he said there's going to be false prophets that rise. Wonder who we could name in that area. Well, what about Simon, the sorcerer? Could we mark him as a false prophet? He claimed to be a great man of God and doing these things. Well, sure. Sure. What about those that when they brought Peter up there and Gamaliel said, hey, look, before these men we had this guy. Before these men we had this guy. Claiming to be somebody great. Well, you know, John warns us, even today, that we're to try the Spirit. Why? Because many false teachers have gone out among us. So Jesus is telling them all about these things. And many shall be deceived. Again, you can read the historians on this. As this unfolds, many people claim to be the Christ and try to get people to go out. Well, now look. In these verses, Christ shows there will be a time of suffering, persecution. The disciples would be hated, offended, betrayed, afflicted, and killed for the Lord's cause. False prophets would rise, deceive many, verse 11. The one who endured to the end would be saved. Can you see that? How that the Lord has said, look, if you just stay faithful to what I've told you and know that this is going to happen, you'll be saved. You'll be all right. But people didn't do that. Look in verse 14. And the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall come the end. Whoa, you know what? As a kid, and I know this verse, you know what I used to think about? Boy, I'll tell you, when that last sermon is preached to those people that have never heard the gospel, boy, you're going to hear the trumpet sound, and whoo, time ain't going to be no more. That's not really what he's saying here. This is scriptures that people take out of context and they apply it. Now, I think we can prove what Jesus is talking about by the Word of God, just like with the rest of it. Look at what the Word of God actually says here. Well, now come on here. Have I messed that up? I believe I have. Let's do it like this. Okay, there we go. Romans chapter 10, verse 18. But I say, have they not all heard? Have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sounds went into all the earth, and their words unto the ends of the world. Now, wait a minute. People say, now, wait a minute, Bill. You can't make me believe that this went through. Well, it didn't. It wasn't over here in the United States at the time. That's true, because there wasn't no such thing as the United States. But in the world that these people knew in the Middle East, and with the people they had, it had went to the ends of the world. We got to understand what the writer is saying. But I say, have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sounds went into all the earth. Well, when we get to Romans chapter 10, the Jews that would accept it has accepted it. The Gentiles have been brought in, as we studied this morning in Acts chapter 10. All races of people has heard the gospel. We can track Paul throughout his journeys and see how that it was led. I don't know what this thing is doing here. It's going backwards on me here for some reason. I don't know why that verse keeps disappearing on me. Okay. Now, I hope Belvis is smart enough to cut this out, because I know what it's doing here. It's cutting my verses out. So when Jesus is talking about this, the gospel had went. The gospel here had went. It had made its run, and it had survived throughout the world. Again, we find in different scriptures, in which we're out of time, and we're sort of out of the running right here. And what we're going to do is just cut it here, because I've got to fix this because it's not coming up. And I know it's going to be a 2-part lesson. So I'm going to quit here early on this so I can straighten this out. I know what happened to it, because I want to bring the rest of these slides up so everybody can see. But I want you to think about it and understand that when the Bible talks about the kingdom or the Word of God being preached throughout the world. It was throughout their known world. It was throughout the Jews and throughout the Gentiles, the Greek. It was throughout all the people. Now, the end that Jesus is putting to us here is when this happens, then that's going to be the destruction of Jerusalem. And he's not talking about the world itself. And this is where a lot of people miss it. Remember what Jesus is telling his disciples. This is all going to take place with you. But you know what? You've got to endure it to the end. Think about the Christian church. Think about the Apostle Paul, one that had afflicted the Christians, who was present at the stoning of Stephen, who in chapter 9 had desired letters that he may go to Damascus and bring back those that were in the way or worshiping Christ, is what he's talking about, and bring them back to Jerusalem to be punished. This is what. Now, the Christians suffered greatly by the hands of the Jews. The Jews was their biggest persecutors. Everywhere Paul went, he always had a crowd of unbelieving Jews to try to make him look bad, to try to belittle his apostleship, try to even his appearances, even his ability. They tried every way in the world to destroy him. So here Jesus tells them, no matter what's happening to you, no matter what's going on, you got to be faithful to the end. Now that, like I said, that could be twofold. Even to us, Romans chapter 2 and verse 10, or 10 and 2 says to us, be thou faithful unto death, and then I will give you a crown of life. We've got to be faithful unto death. And here's what Jesus is telling his disciples. This is what you've got to do. So I hope what we're seeing so far in this chapter is that Jesus is answering their questions. And Jesus is going to, in turn, tell them about some things that they would see before these things happen, that they need to be aware of. And so I hope everybody can come back tonight and hear these. And I hope Belvis can fix the little mistake that was made. I will fix this and continue it tonight. But as of right now, we're out of time pretty much. And so we're going to give the invitation here. If there's any here who can use the assistance of the church, whether it is to obey for the first time or to make one's life right with Christ that's erred, we stand ready to help you as together we stand and sing.